a point of perspective, which is the separated self. And you see, even though the form is endowed with the potential for consciousness, what we see in the 24 in terms of the ajna doesn't mean that it identifies with its unique stature, the self. And it's the self-reflected self, that makes us human. It's the only thing that makes us human. I mean, my joke about us being killer monkeys, I mean, after all, that is what we are. We're killer monkeys. However, this identification with self, this is where the potential lies for some kind of transformation. It's possible, because there is uniqueness and differentiation. And uniqueness should be something that enlivens everyone's spirit. Should be. Doesn't mean that it does, obviously. These strands, what it's saying to us is that there are going to be hexagrams that are lined up on these strands. And yet we're going to see that some hexagrams will appear on other strands, may appear on all strands, may appear on different strands in the same line, may appear in different strands in the same gate, but in a different line. And it's one of the things that, we need to be able to discover about those hexagrams that are the ones that are going to be the logical place where you're going to have these crossings in geometry. And for me, these crossings are very much bridges. They're bridges. There are certain hexagrams, certain lines that are going to be bridges from one process to another. How incredible it will be if we can see the places where the potential that the form offers is endowed with an identifiable self. And where are those gates? And are they the gates that we would have expected? I don't think so. It's like when the voice gave me the wall, and I looked at that and I said, what am I supposed to make of this? What does this mean? I don't quite understand this configuration. I think the same thing is true for these strands. I think that what we're going to find is that hexagrams operate at a level that on the surface, we don't have any idea about, because the way in which any hexagram operates on the surface is as a synthesis that is an illusion. And that we must deconstruct these hexagrams. This is where we're really going to have a breakthrough, is in deconstructing the hexagram outside of the illusion. So we find out that this is a hexagram that's going to bridge this with this, and already it has another level for us. And already there is a new keynote that is established for it. And we need that. See, we need to be able to see very clearly how the sequence not simply operates as a strand, but how it's woven together. And without the bridges, we do not see them, cannot see them. I have a map of the way in which all of the potential of all of the strands come together in a cellular management structure. Now I see things and how they fit together, but I don't truly know how the bridges work. And can't know how the bridges work until I see what are really the bridges. What moves this responsibility to join up with this potential to get to that result. Because these are just very, very separate units. And remember, if you take the thematic here of the emergence of self, and you discover that the emergence of self takes place in the, let's say, the 50-second gate, boy, is it ever going to change your idea about what that gate is really about. In other words, there's another level entirely, and when we get to that level, what you're doing is we're stripping away the Maya. This is really this, pulling back of the sky. You stick your head through, you actually see the gears. Now, you don't want to live in the gear world. You don't want to live in a deconstructed hexagram world. You don't. You don't. You don't. None of us would like that. I'm convinced of that. What we like is that it's all synthesized. This is our playground. But as science, we have to do the other way around. We really have to deconstruct this. We really have to find out what is the essential responsibility of hexagrams. And what is their essential responsibility as units of the transference of information? And where do they transfer the information? And what gets transferred? Because I'm not just interested between what's going to happen between the 24 and the 46. What happens between the 24 and the 7? And the 24 and the 13, and so forth and so on. In other words, what happens when all of these various forces combine? I don't know if there's... Here. It's one of the things to understand about the Maya, the space in between, the temple. And you can see that we have various relationships that operate in this formula. And this is something that's going to be very important for us when we take a look at strands. So, for example, each and every one of these four, they represent a primal strand. And what we see in this is that there is a formula for the way in which they interact. And that formula for interaction is going to create something very odd for us. Look, they will connect this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, right? All around the square. And all around the square, corner to corner. So movement is always dealing with design, and it's always dealing with being. And it is a medium for those. Whereas on the other side, evolution is doing the same thing. Or you go to this corner and design is between these two. In other words, you have all of these possible configurations on the outside, but then you have the illusion here. Now look, how does design get directly to being? Well, we've just been looking at it. We've just looked at design and being. You know how they get to each other? Through the illusion. I mean, think about that. This is very profound. In other words, what we're going to see is that there are natural bridges that are going to exist if the theory is right. I mean, this is part of juxtaposition theory. If juxtaposition theory is correct, when we lay out the strands, we're going to be able to see that the being strand and the evolution strand have obvious bridges. And the being strand and the movement strand have obvious bridges. But the being strand and the design strand do not at all have obvious bridges. This is when we get to see that Maya may be illusion, but it's very dense. That Maya is an interactive field, and we'll see how that works when we get to what is not a single strand, but the synthesized strand of the subjective. That's something else. So our first step to verify the basic nature of the formula is, once we draw out our strands, that we're going to look for these basic relationships. So in fact, when we're looking here at the first two, we're actually looking at, they seem to have such a natural relationship to each other. That's why I said from the beginning, I don't really know if it works this way, just because it's so obvious. Because I know this. In other words, I know that you've got to go through the Maya to get to the other side. So in fact, maybe the most natural bonding in the, what I'm looking at is taking 4, turning them into 2, so it becomes 1. So you have to begin with who belongs to whom. the mating game, played at cosmic scale. Who belongs to whom? So for example, is it being with movement? Or is it being with evolution? It sure as hell doesn't look like it's being with design. In other words, what we're going to see is that if we lay out the strands, we're going to see that being is going to have either a stronger relationship to movement or to evolution, or it's going to be perfectly balanced. I have no idea. Given the nature of mutation, I don't know. I don't know if it's balanced or not. What I do know is we're not going to see any natural bridges that are going to go from being to design. Those strands won't seem to have a relationship, which means that only when we combine them with another strand should we then be able to see a relationship emerge. Now, I don't even know how to do that. After all, I don't have the strands to work with, so I have no idea. I have no idea how they're going to fit together. This is one of the most exciting things about the research. So you're going to be able to do a statistical analysis of which is more. You're going to have a little bit of everything. But the thing that's so important is, are there going to be visible bridges through the Maya? If there are visible bridges through the Maya, I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. If there are visible bridges through the Maya, then we're going to discover very, very important gates. In other words, we're going to discover gates that may in fact be like black holes, the kinds of things that pull the Maya into its being, in a sense. That's the only thing I can imagine them as. My assumption is, no, you don't see them. You won't see them until the 4 becomes 2. If the 4 becomes 2, then the bridges should emerge, like magic. They should simply reveal themselves. Well, that'll be fun to find out. But again, really see what this is and how it works. It's a whole secret of understanding all the 5s. It's a thing about understanding the difference between DNA and RNA. They're both 4s, but they share a different 5 together. The 5 is hidden, but it's always there. It's always there. And there's where the illusion is. So everything that we're talking about, but also we have to see that there's a mechanic to the way in which the pillars operate. And they only operate like this. Why do you think astrology was the first real deep science? Was the recognition that there are relationships in the angles around the outside. This is the pillar of astrology. What human design understands is that's all fine and good. But if you're only looking at an aspect, if you're only looking at somebody's sun being transited by Mars, and you don't see that in the illusion their sun is in an open center, the transit means nothing. This is how you see the maturation of our consciousness. We used to be stuck in the pillars. The whole thing for us now is to go beyond that. It's not just what we see going around the outside. That never is going to give us the truth. And yet the truth is so difficult to penetrate because it's not like the pillar. It's not solid. It's a frequency. It's an illusion. It's not solid. That's why human design is all about the temple. It isn't about the pillars. It's taken me, I don't know how many years it is now. 17 years I'm in this business. It's taken me 17 years until I get to the point where I'm sort of teaching temples. I've been teaching pillars all along. The Not Self is built on pillars. It's built on not being able to, live in the temple, to live, to accept the fact that, you're a helpless byproduct. A helpless, truly helpless byproduct. So think about the way the mechanics work and recognize that what we're looking for is, what is this magic relationship between evolution and movement? Now again, this is our 713 combination. And you can see that they don't have a natural relationship to each other. That they too can only meet through the Maya.
Mhm.
This formula is more complex. What I'll do is that I think that I'll prepare an image file for all of you that will include juxtaposition material so that you can see all of the things about this movement, because this movement includes other terms. And the actual movement or the field that is between each of the corners has a description, has layers of descriptions. All of that to be able to give you, a clear guideline about the very nature of the strand itself. I mean, the most difficult work you have to do here is this deconstruction of just getting down to what it is, and then slowly begin to see, how it begins to construct this environment. The weaver. The secrets. And here we have I remember. The movement is evolution. And movement expands the mind. And it expands mind because, of course, the movement is all about the past. The movement is all about the recognition of the past. The movement is about the pessimism of the past, and all of that needs to be stored. All of it. And it's one of the things for us to see. It's when they try to figure out how the mind works, and they discover that, yes, it is a brain, but what's actually the mind is not anything more than sparks going on. This is not the brain over here. This is the sparks. This is the thing that movement brings. Movement brings this consciousness field. I mean, it's so hard for people to grasp that what you think is not your own. It's one of the most difficult things for a human being to grasp, but what goes through their mind is not theirs. It's not yours. Despite the fact that it seems to be interested in you. It's not yours. It's just something that's passing through. I mean, it is the consciousness field. Transits. I have no idea how profound transits are, how deep they are, how much information, is permeating your environment. It's just there. I mean, you could barely handle sitting here if it weren't for Saturn in 52. Aren't you lucky? Saturn with a big stick saying, if you're not still, I'm going to kill you. Always nice to have a little Saturnian advantage. And you really know that you're in trouble if you're itchy as hell and you want to get out. Because if you're going to live in the program, you might as well be comfortable with what the program does. This is our world. Here in this 13, this strand carries the spark. And the movement does something incredible. Remember this movement of going from point A to point B. Maya, ma, in Sanskrit, to measure. This is the whole point about Maya. Maya is built on measurement. If you got nothing to measure, there's no Maya. If there's no duality, if there's no visible other, there is no Maya. And the moment that there is the other, the moment that they are visible, is the moment that you have the Maya. It's all measurement. I mean, it's all it is. I mean, it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing about mind. It's what mind does. It's what mind, only thing the mind can do, because it's the byproduct of movement. There's that, and there could be this. This is the mind. Always. caught in this shh, with all this stuff pouring through. They're going along. What amazes me is the incredible vanity of the assumption that we are in charge of anything at any level, ever. Because you see that right away in this incredible movement. And we can't help but measure. You can't. We can't. It's everything for us in the mind. Time. I mean, time. The Maya, and time. I mean, time, as I mentioned to you, this is an enormous distortion. But the Maya is held together by time. And it's based on the movement. I mean, that's Einstein's formula. And you see, the only thing that Einstein got was this strand. He caught one of the pillars. And he held on for dear life. Dear old Al. But it's true. Here you can see relativity. The moment you're flying in space and you're measuring, everything's relative. Permanently relative. Always relative. How close, how far, how fast. I mean, the very laws of physics are all about that. And inherent in this is the light. This is the light in the darkness. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. This is the light that goes off in your head when you have a wonderful idea. This is the light. You can't remember, you can't identify. You can't measure, you can't perfect your identification. If you can't perfect your identification, you'll never evolve. This is the whole thing about mind, the perfection of identification. I mean, it's one of the pillars that I worship at. I mean, I understand, Albert. I understand the importance of this pillar. I understand what it means to recognize that this is truly, truly all relative. All relative. When I talk about mind in this context, I'm not talking about the personal mind. I make reference to that in the sense of how we experience mind in the Maya ourselves. But I'm really talking about something much larger than that. We have all kinds of names for it. Universal mind, whatever. For me, it's simply the sum total of the mental plane of humanity. And when I look at the sum total of the mental plane of humanity, we all know how distorted that is. But it's also something to see that in order for us to be moving closer and closer to a wholeness mentally, that we become more identified with the duality. In other words, to be whole is actually to be two things. We can never do better than that. The world is always at its best when it's perfectly balanced. It's the way things are meant to be. In these forms, in the measurement of this line, in the this and that, the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, the up and the down, but all of it, in the ideal to be something that operates correctly, that operates perfectly. Without movement, there's no evolution. Without movement, there's no mind. Without movement, there's nothing. There's no mind. This is the great argument between the yin and the yang. The yin says, yeah, but if you're moving and there's nothing to move, there's nothing to do. You're just going to run out of gas. This is the whole thing about the yin and the yang. It's something that the yin and the yang symbol doesn't show you. Where's the juxtaposition? They're stuck in the pillars. You can see the four pillars in any yin-yang symbol. They look like They're all part of the same thing. But they're divided from each other. And you see, the Maya is seamless. That's what makes the Maya so beautiful. That's why it's so hard for the Maya to break. That's why it's so hard to stick your head out the sky. You know, it's the seamlessness of the Maya, where all these things are together. Where are you? There. The role of the anarchist. In the program, there has to be life, and there has to be death. There has to be the movement into life, and there has to be the movement towards death. Everything that's alive decays and dies. And yet, because of the way in which logic works, in which it projects a pattern into the future that it can never know with certainty, death remains a mystery. A mystery. Now, where in the hell do I come to talking about death here? Well, the first thing to understand is that this is a different kind of movement. This is individualized movement. And here what you're seeing is, rather than the larger evolutionary movement, what you're seeing is the personal geometry. What we come to call in profile, personal destiny, fixed fate, transpersonal karma. We're talking about individual geometries. And the individual geometries always have a point in and a point out. Point in, point out. Evolutionary geometry is endless. It's endless. It's the great plane of geometrical possibility. It's endless. And only in a relative universe does it even warp, in the sense that it'll curve over enough distance. But here you're talking about the individual geometry, and the individual geometry is limited. It is defined and fixed as a measurement. It's one of the first things that I was told by the voice that I thought was curious. I mean, really curious. It said to me that we actually start life with a very precise potential to live. Very precise. Now, it can be messed up through many things. But we actually have, like buying a car and they tell you it's good for 192,416.8 kilometers. Okay. Now, of course, if you're dumb enough to get into a car accident or whatever the case may be, all I'm saying is that what's so interesting is that this individual movement is a very precise, limited movement. And it is the movement of the individual through the process of time. It's reincarnation. But it's reincarnation from the energy perspective rather than the renewal of the form perspective. The seeing here is location. For years I've been telling people that death is a place, not a time. That everything that you associate with something in the future is truly about a place and never about a time. And here it's something that's so clear. It's what I call the door. This is the door. This is everybody's got a door in and a door out. We just do. Do or. I like that in door. You ever thought about that? Do or what? Do or die, baby. You know, this is what it's all about. Here's our door. You got the door in and you got the door out, and that's the movie. And it's one of the things to see about what this brings. Busyness, activity. These are sprung machines. You can see the way the form principle worked, that we ended up with a planet that's 70% generators. Christ almighty. You know, what an activity machine. I mean, push, push, drive, drive, bang, bang, go, go. Whole planet, push, push, bang, bang, go, go. And not just us, plants, insects, you know, you name it. Sacral, push, push, bang, bang, go. Whole world, push, push, bang, bang. Busy, 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 busy. Why? Short trip. Short visit. Keep going. You know, busy, busy, busy till the end. And this is busy, busy, busy till the end. It's not evolution, but it's linked to evolution. These two kinds of movements. In the same way that having the infrastructure for consciousness is not the same as discovering the self. You know, these are things that have to find a way to meet each other. And what I see very clearly is that if you go back to just the basic structure, you can see that what does the Maya actually do as a medium? You know, you can see what it does as a medium. As a medium, it finds a way to bring the form that could potentially house consciousness, how it can bring that form into alignment with the concept of self, the potential of self. Only the Maya does that. Only the Maya creates that direct bridge. Nothing else does. And does it actually get to the other side by going all the way around? Is that just the same thing? Are they going to meet by going all the way around the outside? How does evolution incorporate the tight, frenzied cycle of the human process, of life processes? Through the Maya, or around the wheel. See, I was born an initiator. Initiators are very good at opening doors. You know, this is a huge door to open up. You know, you're looking down this vast, 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 vast plane of, I don't know. But I also want you to see that everything else that I've ever worked with you in human design, we've been able to use the basic information of hexagrams and circuits and all of these things as guidelines. Now you can see that in some cases, yes, I'm doing that now, but I'm only doing that now to get us to a place where we'll abandon that. You know, it's like me talking about, somebody's incarnation cross. And the way the not-self relates to its incarnation cross and the potential of that has nothing to do with what it's actually like. Has nothing to do with what they're actually going to be like. Because you can't know. No more than when I say somebody that takes 7 years that they can really grasp what that difference is. Because it's unique. You know, it's your own metamorphic process. No idea what comes out at the other end. No idea. None. What we're trying to do, at least where I'm trying to guide you, is I'm trying to get you to a point where the most important thing is that when you get to look at a strand, that what you're looking at in that strand is that you're looking at the hexagrams within the context of what its source is, in the context of what its root is, in the context of the base of that strand, and what that means in terms of its integration. And what you're looking for is its relationships based on that to the other strands. This will take a minute because my computer is slow, folks. Just a little bit. No, I didn't want to. I don't want to get into the real detail of this until tomorrow because there's a lot that I want to be able to cover. What I want to show you is what I've been discussing, and just to give you an idea of what I mean by that. So for example, this is the Weaver. You can see that it's listed here as a 3-6-4 sequence. And that's based on my experimenting with the formula and the movement that takes place from one hexagram to the other, based on the formula. So here is an example of a movement. Now, again, I don't want to go through all of it, but you know, when we're dealing with the Weaver, we have certain things that we're looking at in terms of what the overall nature of that is. So, for example, if we go back to our basic story. So we're looking at the 13, and we're looking at the 13.3, and we're looking at the whole business of pessimism, and we're looking at all of this business about the nature of the past, of evolution, of all of these themes that we've been discussing. And then you can see, for example, here, that 13.3, according to my calculation, goes to the 33.6, then goes to the 19.4, goes back to the 33, goes to the 41, goes to the 31, goes back to the 41. It's changing lines in its progression, and you can see it's a 3-6-4, 3-6-4, 3-6-4, 3-6-4 progression. Okay, assuming that that's correct. So, first thing is, I look at that and I say to myself, okay, what is the 3-6-4? In other words, you know, if you look, for example, the as far as I can tell from my first preliminaries, the alpha is a 3-1-5, and here we have the corner, which is a pure 6-3. You know, and the only one I don't know is the bundle, because the bundle is going to have so many unique configurations, and this is where you're going to get everything. In other words, you're going to get all the possibilities in terms of line coming out of the bundle. So the bundle is probably, because it's codon related, the bundle is probably the place where we're going to have a great many bridges. However, we'll have to see that, because that's the most complex of the basic research, the first basic research that we have to do. These is just about, you know, following the formula and confirming whether this is accurate, and then going through all of the various hexagrams to begin to lay them out in a sense, so that you can really see, okay, what is this strand? And of course, that strand is a number of things. You can see that we're going to have line convergence. Whether we're going to have hexagram convergence, we have to wait and see until we get the strands, you know, laid out. But here's an example of a very big strand. Okay, all of that laid out in a progression. Now it goes all the way around the wheel. I mean, it goes all the way around the wheel in going through its entire process. It doesn't necessarily touch every single hexagram.
Yeah.
and it's only operating through certain lines. So for example, when I'm thinking about what the weaver represents, in other words, this movement, this evolutionary process, that I can relate that evolutionary process to the way in which, the 1 and the 3 and the 6 function. Now it also says to me that if I see that there's going to be in the next strand, similar lines, then I can see that these line themes can be potential bridgeways. And also based on our understanding of lines, we can begin to get an overall view of what that's like. A 6-3 cycle in the corner would mean that the corner is deeply, deeply mutative. So we're able to intuit certain things from being able to see, what the basic line system is. But what I'm looking for is, let's find a new way of looking at these hexagrams with a new keynote vision. In other words, that's going to help us to begin to find the language, for the bridges. But obviously in going through here, if we have, for example, let's say the 33-6, which is the second sequence here, in this strand. If we have in another strand the occasion of a 33-6, then we know something. It's that simple. It's like, okay, and what I want is, I want to be able to see a drawing, God bless computers. I want to be able to see a drawing that maps all the bridging. How these strands come together. It must be gorgeous. I sort of can imagine it. This is the beginning of sequence, real sequence mapping. So we map out the strands, and then we start looking for the bridges. We start looking for these integrating points. The next thing is that when we see these integrating points, what we're looking at is a Maya mechanism. After all, the Maya is not produced by the pillar itself. The Maya is produced by the interactivity of the various pillars. And that is something that is, there are places where that is forced out by the fact that they're forced to connect to each other. It's like when I did the quarters with you, I said to you, look, these quarters, don't be misled that it's the wheel being divided into quarters. It's the illusion of the wheel arising out of 4 different things. And we call them quarters. We put it in a wheel because our illusion works well that way. After all, the human design body graph, it's the most extraordinary symbol that we've ever had. It's extraordinary because it's the first major symbol that isn't about the outside. Our whole history is based on systems that go around the pillars or look for relationships between the pillars. This is about seeing that there is a center to all of this. Our goal in that is that if we can see finally these bridges, we can see what hexagrams, what lines, then we can begin to map it, both in terms of visually aligning it so that we can see sequencing, but at the same time to understand the underlying chemistry. Because the underlying chemistry is going to align us to the science. If we get the sequencing right, we have everything right. So here you can see what I'm referring to. We're going to lay out the sequence, and then we're going to do comparative work. We're going to match sequences. Now the thing that I'm concerned about is that the first 3 sequences are very easy to map. The formulas are very straightforward, and you just got to go back and forth in the wheel, following whatever the formula is, and you're able to construct that rather simply. But as you'll see, because I'll spend most of my time tomorrow trying to thrash out the codon approach with you, doing the codon sequence is going to be the most difficult, and in the end, that's going to hold the balance for everything else. That's the area where I think it's going to take, it's not just a matter of work, it's going to take some real insight and I don't know, that's very, very complex. It's very complex because each codon family represents a kind of mini cycle. And, to be able to investigate all of them is really, really something. These are not so difficult. The Weaver wood was, at least from my perspective, this was very easy to calculate. So we'll be able to see right away if we can, verify this calculation, the other basic calculations, and then we have a place to start. But we're going to have to get them all in order to get that to work, because when you go down to the codon level, you actually have to go by codon group, and I'll talk about the formula and how that works, and then you have to map it through each codon group. And, you know, that is quite a lot of work. That's something that, yeah, it's going to be quite an exercise. I'll see how well I can do tomorrow to explain this to you, because it's really something, it's also beautiful. But, you know, actually being able to go, this is, for example, arginine, actually to be able to find, to be able to demark the actual codon path, the actual movement. You know, codons have, most of them have many different members. We think of them as gates. And there is a sequence and an order to them, and a way in which information moves from one to the other. And of course, it's very interesting to see that in this context, and then to lay out some kind of a chain associated with that. But there are a lot of codons, you know, and to be able to organize this, you know, and more importantly is it's not, this part of it's easy, just to map one codon and its chain, but then to find out how that codon meets the next one, and which next one it meets. And we're only going to know that when the other three strands are built. If your brains are dissolving, I understand why, but, you know, it's something. See, this is the easy part, if there is such a thing like this. Many years ago, when I first started to think about beyond what my superficial job seemed to be, which was to introduce people to their design, begin that whole process of transference, I attempted to do this long time, and I got about, you know, I got deep into some sequences, and I realized that I truly knew where I had to go, but I couldn't get there. And I couldn't get there because I didn't know enough. Didn't have enough knowledge. Didn't have enough knowledge of design. Didn't have enough knowledge of how to articulate the Maya. Didn't have enough knowledge and experience in what it is to live with my kind of consciousness. Didn't know those things. In November, when I discovered that, you know, this had not been set out properly, there was a part of me that was really annoyed, I guess. There's a certain beauty in being a heretic and being an Aryan, that you know things nobody else knows. You know, because I'm not selfish, I don't hold things back and let them out. So it's very beautiful to watch that movie. And it was so obvious to me when it came to that point in November that I looked at that and I thought, you know, there is no way that I'm going to do this. And given that I have a third line mind and I'm deeply pessimistic from the mental point of view, particularly when it comes to the other, I don't know if you can do this either. What I do know is that I would like all of you that can to really try. You know, I know this isn't for everyone in terms of being really involved with doing this work. But it won't get done if there aren't those that are willing to help. It's clear to me that this is another place for me in my own development and growth as a teacher. And as an Aquarian, that is somebody that believes in truly in the principle that everyone has the right to the facts. I've never been a great team player. And when it comes to this, it's something that needs a team player. And it needs guidance and nurturing, but most of all, it needs the determination of any explorer. I will help you as much as I can and add what I can, but I'm really helpless until I have a framework. I'm really helpless. I can't go any further in my exploration until I can really see all of this laid out in front of me. And I know, given what I do, I've entered into an enormously busy phase in my life. I can't afford to be a researcher. You know, I have a growing worldwide organization. I have my own responsibilities to my work, to the software direction, to all of the things that I'm involved with in design. And I don't want to leave this by the wayside. You know, it's very important to me that this process that we have opened up together, that it continues, and that it continues as a mutated force. You know, it was Alok mentioning this morning that he woke up and there was the 360 and something was different. You know, this is the nature of our process. You know, this level of human design, you know, it is rare